Do you think it's possible to be pro-diversity without despising or like being bigoted against white people?
It would be very, very hard.
Can you send me any form of evidence specifically that white people inherently, genetically have a predisposition towards this that other groups do not?
Just look outside.
The whole of European history.
So migration is causing wildlife collapse. Is that the argument we're on right now?
We are saying that the more people you have in a country and the more development in that country, the less space there is for wildlife. And I am telling you this now.
I went there, and my observable reality was that I saw the house prices were going up, but migration was actually bringing it down by 1.7%. That's what I intuited.
To be honest, your observable reality could be anything. Because
perfect! You got it! Excellent! Thank you, Mark, for proving my point.
Because you're an idiot. You're an absolute midwit, soy-filled...
I'm convinced Mark has to be a 4chan machine learning program.
Except for the bell curve. Read the bell curve. And
yes, written by two people who have no degrees in genetics, by the way. Just thought I'd point that out.
No, you see, because again, that book is simple, makes sense. What you're saying doesn't make sense. But carry on, Brittany.
So I'll write some like, what's it called, bedtime stories for you, Mark, and I'll send them over to you, and then they're going to be really simple, I promise, and maybe we can make some progress here on this issue. And what you said it was is not true at all whatsoever. So
I can't wait. At some point in this debate, I would bet some amount of money that one of these guys is going to say that they're Jewish.
Mark, do you love black people?
That's a good question.
All right, so today we'll be debating the Great Replacement. Each person can have about 5-minute opening. Then we will have open discussion. At the end, we will do a Q&A from the audience. So if you guys have questions, you can send them in through the powerchat.live. We will ask those questions at the end, and we'll do closing statements and final thoughts after the Q&A. So I guess we can get started with opening statements. Mark, did you want to get us started?
I can certainly do that. Right. Well, when I was asked to participate in this debate, I asked Brittany, the host, exactly what this debate was about. And I was given 2 different points in a text message that she wanted me to discuss. And both of these points relate to the issue of demographic change. Now, the first issue I was asked to address tonight was, is the Great Replacement real? Well, the Great Replacement, or white genocide as some call it, is the process whereby people of European descent are being replaced in both their ancestral homelands or the nations that their forefathers founded. This phenomenon will lead to those of European descent becoming minorities in places like the US, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom by the end of this century. Now, I'm not really sure what there is to debate about this, as the Great Replacement is not only very well documented in terms of statistical evidence, but as human beings, we can also observe the world in which we live. And observable reality clearly shows us that white countries all over the world have experienced increasing waves of mass immigration, which have already transformed cities such as London into places where the indigenous people are minorities. But let's look at the UK figures as a whole on demographic replacement, as they're very illuminating. In 1950, there were fewer than 20,000 non-whites in Britain, the vast majority of whom were first-generation immigrants. In other words, they weren't born here. These people made up just 0.04% of the population. Yet by 2011, the time of the last census, the non-white population of Britain had risen to over 8 million and accounted for around 13% of the population. To put this into perspective, in just over 60 years, the non-white population of Britain had grown over 400-fold, and since 2011, immigration has only increased. The trajectory is clear. White Britons will be a minority by 2066 or sooner. Now, some may say this is a natural phenomenon, and others, like myself, say that this is something that has been planned and accelerated by the establishment, supported by the media, and furthermore, I contend that those who have campaigned against such demographic changes have been vilified and even criminalized. So really, it's impossible to credibly argue that such a replacement isn't taking place. The only thing we can reasonably debate is whether this replacement has been a net positive or a net negative for people of European descent. And I would argue that the consequences of this replacement for white people, especially white Britons, has been, on balance, profoundly negative. Whether this has affected Indigenous Britons through falling wages, through rising house prices, or through the destruction of our countryside, mass immigration, the resulting growth in the population of these islands, and the replacement of the Indigenous people has led to numerous negative outcomes, not least the rise in crime, the rise in terrorism, and of course the sexual assault, rape, torture, and sexual trafficking of more than 100,000 British girls at the hands of migrants. But believe it or not, things will only get worse for white people as they become a minority. Whilst white people are constantly told that minorities must be given special privileges and a leg up, when white people become a minority in towns and cities, they do not benefit from their minority status. They receive no protections and are often treated appallingly as worse than second-class citizens. And the establishment and the media are regularly complicit in covering up crimes against white people that are perpetrated by those not indigenous to the British Isles. If white people are reduced to minorities, they will not be celebrated and protected, but instead they will be a hated and despised minority that will be repeatedly blamed for all the ills and all the failings of the multicultural state in which they live. Thank you.
All right. I guess we can go back and forth. So, Mouthy, you want to go next?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't have much of like an opening statement because obviously me and Roserist aren't really taking the affirmative in this debate, but sort of, I guess, just with respect to my general position on these points, I would say that with respect to whether or not demographic change is happening, it obviously is, but I don't think that's really the debate. I think the debate is more, is this natural or, you know, I guess when Mark frames it as, is it natural or is it planned? That's a bit confusing to me because no doubt, whatever our stance on immigration policy is, it's going to be planned, right? Our immigration policy is set intentionally, right? Whether we have open borders or closed borders. And so when it's framed as planned or natural, I guess I'm not really sure what that means. I guess what the question that I would focus on is the intention, is the motivation for allowing in migration, this idea that we need to erase white people or something like that. I think that's an implausible story. I just think there are a variety of more plausible explanations for why people might support immigration. I think it carries certain economic benefits and so on. And then I guess with respect to whether or not white people, the consequences for white people are on net bad, I don't really buy that the consequences are on net bad for white people. I mean, I think immigration brings a variety of benefits, higher rates of innovation, higher rates of economic growth. The stuff on wages, I think, is a little sketchy. Mark didn't really present any mechanistic argument or any data in support of his claim. Of course, it's the case that when migrants come in, that increases the supply of labor, which might drive down wages. But it's also the case that migrants also increase demand for products, which increases demand for labor, which drives up wages, which is why generally the literature on the relationship between immigration on wages shows that it's at worst like a wash. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that there are a variety of benefits of immigration. I think that all of the sort of negative things that Mark or Laura would point to, such as increased racial tensions, is obviously the big one that Mark was mentioning. I mean, we just have a lot of data on the kinds of things that can go a long way to alleviate racial tensions, and those things include lowering racial wealth gaps, eliminating residential racial segregation, implementing more sort of integrating institutions. So, for example, there was a lot of data showing that when people live together with other races in college or universities, or when people work with other races in the military, that goes a very long way towards eliminating racism. And so, yeah, I just think that there are very plausible policies that we could implement to sort of alleviate these fears of racial tension and infighting. And I think that implementing those are a much better idea than the sort of, just implementing an ethno-state, which carries huge opportunity costs in terms of we'd lose out on a lot of benefits of diversity and immigration. And also it's just not very politically plausible or politically realistic to think that we would be able to achieve that.
Okay. Lori, do you want to go last, or I think we'll go to Rose.
All right, excellent. Yeah, so we had 2 points for this, right? We had great replacement, and then should we preserve racial demographics? And then to Brittany, are we going to have this as like 2 separate segments, or are we just going to do all of it in one uninterrupted?
I think we can just do it in one. I mean,
okay, yeah, sure. Okay, then I'll combine both of this. So on the great replacement specifically, demographics are changing. Yes, that's true, but that's okay. For white genocide and for great replacement thing specifically, what needs to be established for it to be considered a genocide and for the great replacement theory to be followed is you need malicious intent to harm white people. Just because policies are being put in place that do affect the demographics in a particular way, that doesn't mean that that's the intended goal of said policies. So for instance, during COVID, we had a lot of lockdowns that prevented businesses that require in-person participation from functioning. Does that mean that there is a conspiracy from the government during COVID to run indoor mini golf like companies out of business? No, it's not the case, right? Because this is a consequence that obviously the state knew is going to happen. We know that certain businesses are going to suffer, but that doesn't mean that the point of the lockdowns was to make these businesses suffer and to have this unintended or to have this consequence in that regard. So once again, intent is very necessary, and I have not seen that adequately proved, and I expect my opposition to be able to prove that today, should they hold the position that the Great Replacement as it is presented and white genocide as it is presented is real. Furthermore, there's also questions to be asked about the motive for such a conspiracy. So a lot of people will often say the thing about how, hey, from the American perspective, Democrats want great migration because it benefits them in the voting. I think this is more of an issue with the political strategy for more right-wing parties than it is to do with migration as a whole, because a lot of minorities, they are very conservative, especially when it comes to social issues. So it's very possible for a lot of right-wing parties to tap into them as a potential voter base, and you even see the change of, for instance, Hispanic migrants, they're leaning more Republican than ever before. So I don't buy this as a motive either. That doesn't make sense. So I'm waiting to see another motive presented by my opposition in this conversation. Furthermore, onto the second thing here about whether or not we should preserve racial demographics. Racial demographics on their own don't really hold any inherent value. And through engaging in a wide range of policies in order to preserve that, we are missing out on a lot of way more meaningful thing that is going to impact people's lives in a way more material way. So for instance, there are questions to be asked about how this could even be accomplished in regards to potentially the curtailing of civil rights of minorities and non-white groups within Western countries today. That's something interesting that I want to see my opposition talk about. But then there's also, like Mouthy mentioned, the opportunity costs that exist with having a political system that tries its very hardest to prevent these types of things. We talked about, economic things, and there's a whole lot of other things we can talk about specifically as well. Things like social cohesion and the treatment of white people is also something that was discussed by Mouthy a bit, how there's a wide range of different things we can do to minimize and prevent this from happening, such as curtailing segregation, improving economic equality. So I want to throw that out there as well. And yeah, this is something also that we'd be interested in talking about. But overall, there are issues that come with migration to some extent. However, overwhelmingly, migration and not having like an inherent value place on racial demographics and instead on focusing on what's going to give us the overall best benefits seems to be the better policy and the better mindset to have in regards to these type of things. And we should strive to maximize the positives of these types of policies while minimizing the harms. But a conversation about whether or not we should throw all of that out the window in order to preserve these racial demographics, in order to prevent these negatives that we see no really real evidence for, I think is a bit silly. And yeah, that's my overall take.
All right, Lori back, or should we just?
She's not back, but I'm a husband. I've been given clearance to read her opening statement.
Okay.
I don't know. I'll get started. I was invited here this evening to participate in this debate alongside Mark Collett and to debate the topics of whether the Great Replacement is real and whether we should preserve our racial demographics. The Great Replacement is a demographic replacement of European peoples or white peoples in their ancestral homelands or founding nations. So, from a British perspective, we're talking about the demographic replacement of ethnically British people in the United Kingdom. The fact that this is happening is undeniable. In the United Kingdom, we have a government census which is released every 10 years and which details information about the population of our country. The percentage of foreign-born people living in Britain was 0.5% in 1851. That's half a percentage. And that figure was very stable before and after that year for a very long time. Fast forward to 1951, which is about the time that mass immigration to Britain began, and the percentage of foreign-born peoples jumps by 6 times to approximately 3%. By 2011, that figure was 13%. There are plenty of other figures we can use to highlight our demographic replacement. In terms of ethnicity, the white and white British share of the population of the United Kingdom, and in particular England, is dropping by around 5% per decade, a figure that will likely increase as contributing factors have also increased. The number of state school children of minority ethnic origin in England is around 33%, a figure which is increasing by around 1% every year. And the number of live births in England and Wales categorised as white British is currently only 58%, just over half. Again, this figure is dropping year on year. I'd like to add that although the statistics back up the predictions of nationalists, we shouldn't need statistics to prove what is evidently clear when we look outside our windows. Towns and cities are being overrun. We are already a minority in our capital city, London, and cities like Leicester, Luton, Slough, and now also Birmingham. Even cities like Bradford, in which we have not yet reached minority status, are beginning to feel like foreign countries where pockets of isolated communities have formed. Our demographic replacement is now so apparent that it is spoken about openly by those who support it. Our elected officials, the media, and political pundits openly brag about our diverse nation and how our countries are becoming more and more multicultural. In fact, our demographic replacement is only denied when it is spoken about by somebody who is against it. One example of this is the left-leaning Guardian newspaper, who published an article titled "The Last Days of a White World" in the year 2000. The article spoke about, and I quote, "We are near a global watershed, a time when white people will not be the majority in the developed world, Britain included." Yet the same newspaper will call us conspiracy theorists when we share those same figures. In terms of how this affects the native population, we could talk about things like overcrowdedness, the environmental impact, housing shortages, hospital queues, the increase in certain crimes, the hate speech laws that have been put in place to stop us from speaking out in opposition, problems in the education sector and work-related problems such as racial diversity quotas across the public and private sector. However, nothing comes close in terms of the negatives to those intense feelings. However, nothing comes close in terms of negatives to the intense feeling of beginning to feel like a stranger and unwelcome in your own home. In Bradford, a city that I mentioned earlier, which has a large percentage of Pakistani Muslims, mosques have replaced the churches, the shop signs are in Arabic, the people do not speak our language, the clothes shops are full of shalwar kameez and foreign food, and there's an overwhelming feeling of us and them. These people do not want to integrate to our culture, not that they ever could. They want to replace ours with theirs. As our percentage of the population continues to drop, such problems will only be amplified. The solution for our people is nationalism, a strong nation state where our people can be safe and prosperous and where we can have self-determination. I wish this for the British people and for all other peoples around the world. Thank you.
All right, so we can open up the floor now then.
I guess we can begin with try to prove malicious intent with everything that's happening.
I don't have to prove malicious intent. The whole point of the Great Replacement is that it is happening. Statistically, it is happening. White people are becoming a minority in either their ancestral homelands or the countries or the nations in which they founded. What you're trying to do is redefine it to say that we have to explicitly prove malicious intent or it isn't happening. Well, it is happening. It's been proven. Even your little buddy there, the other half of Soy Squared, has admitted that it's happening. I mean, you two guys between you, I mean, you guys make Destiny look like the golden one, don't you? But you're here tonight, giggling away, mumbling and stumbling through your intros, and basically saying, ultimately, what we are facing today is an unprecedented situation where white people will be a minority. White people don't really like it. There's plenty of social tension. But if we're all forced into one space and made to like it, that's going to be good because you guys say it is. And every time that's actually happened, what actually ends up happening is there is more conflict. Every time you force more multiculturalism and you force togetherness between people who aren't meant to be together, you create more conflict. But when there's more conflict, your solution to more conflict is that we force you even further together because that will be the solution to the problem that you've created. So you can sit there, wring your hands,
yeah, I mean, I don't care about the rambling. I don't care about the rambling. So, I mean, you just said like that the evidence that I provided was because I said so, right? I mean, I can reference you like a large amount of literature suggesting that when races work together in like universities or in the military, this has a market effect on lowering racism, right? So I can actually give you empirical evidence for this. You haven't really given me any evidence for the contrary claim. All you've said is, well, you've just asserted it, right? So I mean.
No, I've asserted that statistically, white people are becoming a minority, which is true. And whatever learned report or big-brained theory that you've got on forcing people to live together and getting them to work together, it doesn't really outweigh the fact that in Britain alone, you've had hundreds of thousands of white girls raped. This is a rape epidemic that is being carried out by mainly Pakistani Muslim men. But I'm sure that's all okay by you guys, as long as you get all this wonderful foreign food. And I can't remember which one of you midwits said innovation. Well, I'm not sure what innovations we've ever had out of sub-Saharan Africa, but I'm really looking forward to them establishing a Wakanda, here in Luton or Bradford. It's not going to happen.
Okay, I'm going to cut in here. So just on the question I asked before and the answer you give. So you agree with me then that what's happening right now is not being driven by some anti-white racist bias. What's actually happening is that it's
being driven by an anti-white.
So there we go. We have malicious intent. So prove that to me, please.
But I don't have. That doesn't have to be proven malicious intent.
But if it's anti-white bias that's causing it, that means that it's driven with the effect and with the goal of eliminating white people.
It doesn't matter whether you hated the bathwater or not. It's been replaced with baked beans. The effect is the same. You've got a bath full of beans, which is
all right.
Yeah, so we agree on the effect,
but malicious intent, don't you?
Which is negatively impacting our people.
Do you have evidence of malicious intent?
And your dancing around it is not going to change anything, is it?
Do you have evidence of malicious intent or don't you?
Just to jump in, if I may, the government know that this is happening because we know the figures, so they obviously know the figures as well. And they also know that the population, are against mass immigration because they campaign on anti-immigration platforms before elections. So best case scenario, they know that we're being demographically replaced and they know that we don't want it and they refuse to do anything about it. And worst case scenario, they're doing it intentionally. But I don't think it matters whether it's intentionally or they're just letting it happen. Either way, they're letting it happen. Surely that's the thing that matters.
I think, no, it absolutely does matter because, for instance, if we talk about the intent and why this is happening, then me and Mouthy can provide arguments and be like, hey, maybe this isn't some big conspiracy to like get rid of white people. It just ends up being the fact that, hey, a lot of the policies that are very important in the economic development, in domestic development of these countries are going to be policies that favor migration. And that is the positives that we want to get from migration that we're trying to get at. And then as a side effect of that, demographics are going to change. And if we can agree on that that's probably what's happening and it's not some big, huge conspiracy, then it's going to be easier for us to talk about that and to talk about the effects and whether or not they're positive or negative. But if you guys have the perception that this is, these people hate white people and therefore they want to do what they do, then we're going to have a disconnect in that conversation there. We're not going to be able to bridge that. That's why that matters.
There are plenty of politicians in the United Kingdom that stand up in Parliament and say things like, we deserve this because of the empire. They openly gloat about it and brag about it. They're clearly very, very proud of it. So to say that there's no intent there when they're incredibly anti-white all over their social media accounts, I think it's very naive.
So to be clear, when we say intent, do we mean the intent is to change the racial demographics and to minimize white people, or is the intent to argue for policies such as that of migration, and therefore that's another effect of it? Because there's a difference in between those two things. It's like the difference between, like I talked about in the mini golf example. Is it that the government wants to, run indoor mini golf out of business, or is it just that there are policies that they're aimed at getting at another positive and they're having this unintended effect?
But migration isn't a net positive. You keep saying migration's a positive. It's not a net positive. And whatever positives you have, such as sort of yummy food or whatever other such nonsense. I mean, I like it when you people argue for mass immigration, because your number one argument is always, we get diversity, as if diversity in itself is some sort of magical shibboleth that makes our life better. It doesn't. And it seems to me that you're now already going down the route of define intent. Well, we all know what intent actually means, because we've all got dictionaries, we've all got thesauruses, we can all Google things. The fact is, politicians, the mainstream media, and influential people who wield huge amounts of soft power in the West have said that this is a good thing, this is a positive, that white people being reduced to a minority is a positive. They have said that. They say that the more diversity we have, the better off we are. And more diversity equals fewer white people. So what they are essentially saying is that the fewer white people we have, the better off we will be. And that is not true, because when you look at civilizational development, the greatest civilizational development we have seen has been here in Europe. And the people that we are importing from elsewhere in the world usually come from places where there have been the least civilizational development. And if you bring people who have created nothing to places that have created everything and mix the two, there is inevitably going to be somewhat of a clash, because people who have created nothing will find it very difficult to maintain the everything that have been created by others.
Do you want to go, Mouthy, or should I? Because so far right now we can on the first thing about the intent is, so once again, we don't have any evidence for an anti-white driver for this. All we have is a pro-diversity driver for that, which we agree that that's probably the case. So now we can move on to the other things we talked about,
pro-diversity, such as the effect. Because pro-diversity means fewer white people.
Do you think it's possible to be pro-diversity without despising or like being bigoted against white people?
It would be very, very hard to separate pro-diversity from anti-white, because every time something comes more diverse, the things you see taught in schools, the things you see pushed by the media, the different programs pushed by local and national government are always always anti-white in their outcome. They teach white children to hate themselves. They impose quotas, which means harder for white people to get jobs. Jobs are no longer given out on the basis of the quality of the individual, but instead on the color of the individual. So when you have diversity, it always disenfranchises white people, because that is its purpose.
Yeah, so I mean, if the claim is that just having more diversity is going to lead to, you know, white people being harmed and marginalized, I guess just like I don't know why this would be the case. I don't know like what evidence we have for that, right? I mean, I've suggested so far that insofar as we're worried about racial tensions and you know, racial fighting, firstly, the effect sizes are very small, right? So like the biggest like recent meta-analysis on this found that like the relationship between diversity and social cohesion is statistically significant, and that diversity to some extent lowers social cohesion, but the effect sizes were small, such that like diversity could account for like 0.66% of the variation in social cohesion that was observed. So like the effect is like not that big. You're making a very apocalyptic story out of something that's in reality very minor. And then like we know that there are things that can alleviate the impact of diversity on social cohesion. And I've listed what some of those things are, and you haven't really spoken to that at all. You've just kind of feigned incredulity about it. Which,
no, I haven't. You know. I've said the truth about it. What you're saying is, to alleviate the problems of multiculturalism, we need more multiculturalism. And the way you guys talk is frankly a complete joke. We have presented here that there have been hundreds of thousands of white girls who have been groomed, sexually abused, raped, but it's brushed under the carpet by people who value diversity. Because to people like you, your diversity project is more important than white girls, white children living in a world which is rape-free, because these girls have gone through hell, but you're happy for that as long as you get your lambooner, or you can say the world is more diverse, or you can sit on YouTube, because you're obviously allowed on YouTube because you think all this is fantastic, so obviously you're not going to lose your channel, and you're going to make some money off that. So that's why you support this. It's absolutely pitiful, and it's morally reprehensible. If white people in their thousands were doing this to non-white girls, you guys would be going mad about it. But because it's white girls who are the victims, it doesn't bother you.
So we think that we don't support. Oh, sorry. Do you think that we don't support steps to prevent refugees from raping white women?
The best step is not to let them in.
Well, I mean, sure, we could eliminate any problem by just like stopping letting all people in, and then stopping everyone from like having kids, right? Like, I mean, if take any, I take it that you're pro increasing like birth rates, right? And I am too, through like allowing like welfare policies and so on that make it easier for people to have kids, right? Some of those kids who are going to be born as a result of those policies are going to end up raping women, right? But generally, we take it that we have to.
Whoa. I've heard this argument before. So what you're saying is, because white men rape some white women in very, very low numbers, we should import other men from elsewhere in the world who rape white women in greater numbers.
Let's talk about this grooming gang thing, okay? Because this is something you bring up a lot, about the Muslim grooming gangs, right? So the best piece of evidence we have right now for the demographic breakdown of these perpetrators is the Home Office report on the breakdown of what these consisted of and who were the main perpetrators in those grooming gangs. What do you mean we don't have the Home Office report? I have it on my second monitor right here.
Report on that.
They didn't release the figures properly, but we do actually have a study by
hold on.
Have you seen the Quillian one that's now been deleted?
You don't have the Home Office report.
What do you mean we don't have that? I'm sitting on a 59-page report right now. Group-based child sexual exploitation characteristics for offenders.
The Home Office report on the grooming gangs was sealed by the government and not released because they said it was not in the public interest to know the truth. Grooming gang review kept secret as Home Office claims releasing findings are not in the public interest. What you're about to quote,
what am I looking at? What 59-page report am I looking at right now?
You're looking at the one in relation to Operation U-Tree, which was historic incidences of sexual abuse within the establishment. The Home Office report on the Pakistan...
Wait, sorry, Operation what? Wait, what's the second word there?
U-Tree.
What's the first letter on that? Is it U? Is that the first letter of U-Tree?
Y-E-W.
Y-E-W. Okay, so Operation U-Tree doesn't show up a single time in this report. Just Control F, Operation U-Tree, 0 results. So that's not what it's about. So you're talking about something else.
That report is nothing to do with it. I'm posting this in the chat.
So what am I looking at then? I'm curious.
You can see this and post it in the groups. The grooming gang review was kept secret as Home Office claims releasing findings is not in the public interest.
So Operation U-Tree doesn't appear a single time in this report that I'm looking at right now. Right now I'm looking at a report called Group-Based Child Sexual Exploitation Characteristics for Offending. And what you said it was is not true at all whatsoever. So
I can't wait. At some point in this debate, I would bet some amount of money that one of these guys is going to say that they're Jewish. I've got a feeling that might happen.
Okay, so I can read what one of the parts of the executive summary here. So, a number of high-profile cases, including the offending in Rotterdam, investigated by Professor Alexis J. and Rockdale Group, convicted as a result of Operation Span, the convictions in Telford, have mainly involved men of Pakistani ethnicity. Beyond specific high-profile cases, the academic literature highlights significant limitations to what can be said about the links between ethnicity in this form of offending. Researchers found that group-based CSE offenders are most commonly white. So I don't know what to tell you. You seem to be making this up. I'm seeing a report right now. You said it was something else, but
the report on the grooming gangs, you can Google it, was sealed by the government.
Then what am I looking at? I need to understand what I'm looking at.
You're not looking at the government report.
So what am I looking at?
You can go. I don't know what you're looking at because I'm not looking at your screen.
I'll read out the text to this again.
The Home Office report was sealed because it was so explosive and it exposed the level of abuse that white girls were going through at the hands of people of migrant descent. So the government had to seal it to stop public unrest. Laura, you've got a very interesting statistic from an actual Muslim.
So once again, I don't know what I can. So this is a new strategy.
Yeah,
I'm not aware of
well,
people
Laura-
saying that the
Laura, get
report
in
I'm
here
looking
because-
at doesn't exist,
I
but
think-
who knows?
I think the one that you might be looking at, Rose Wrist, is the one where they changed the classification of the perpetrators that they were looking at, so that they could open it up to, different styles of abuse as well. But there was a study done by Quilliam a number of years ago, I think maybe 3 or 4 years ago, which had a good sample size, and that reported back that 86% of perpetrators were, I think it was either Pakistani or Pakistani Muslim. That's actually been removed from their website now. There was a report that tried to debunk it, but if you guys want to go into that, I can also debunk that report. But if you haven't seen it, I suppose it doesn't matter. But I think that's the most accurate report that we have, which said that it was around 86%. So that's a huge overrepresentation. At the last census, Muslims were around 5% of the population, and Pakistanis were around 2% of the population.
Yeah, I don't know what this Killiam study is. The fact that you already said that people have had a lot of serious disagreements on it makes me a bit worried. I think that trusting the Home Office, which seems to be probably the most comprehensive data set on this, is going to be a lot more reliable than what you're referencing.
A lot of people haven't had disagreements with it. There was one study that tried to debunk it and failed.
So when I Google it, I'm getting a bunch of things specifically about how this thing is misleading. That's the first thing when I Google Killiam study grooming. I'm getting things about it being misleading. But yeah.
Why are you not listening to the words? The Home Office report on the grooming scandal that was commissioned was never released because the government said it wasn't in the public interest.
I don't know what I'm looking at here. If you're saying this isn't released,
I don't know what you're looking at.
So I can read out the title for the fourth time if you want me to.
You're waving your hand around. Your limp wrist is flapping in the air. The soy is spilling out from your orifices. You don't know what you're talking about. And what you're trying to do is weaselly explain your way out of the fact that hundreds of thousands of white girls were sexually abused by men of migrant descent. But you don't care because that stands in the way of your diversity project.
So once
again,
again,
I'll just say, this isn't an issue I've looked into.
Mouthy Infidel, here's a challenge. Make it through a sentence without saying
Okay. So the point I was just going to make is that I haven't looked into this issue, but even granting the premise,
kind of sounds a bit like there. Are we letting you off on that?
We have two brand new debate strategies. You're not allowed to say and you're denying the existence of a report that I'm literally looking at my monitor. These are high level tactics. I'm not aware of them. But go on, Mouthy.
Yeah, I mean, so even if I grant the premise that we have this big problem with rape gangs, right? If that's true, right, I'd have to look into it more. This is just not an area of research. If it's true that this is a big problem, and the scale is such that it warrants restricting the amount of refugees from this specific area that Britain is allowing in, then that's fine.
Specific area,
right?
as in the West.
I don't know what you're talking about. You said it's Pakistani immigrants specifically, right? That was your claim.
I was just being facetious. I was saying the place where we should stop immigrants coming into is the West, as in don't let them in and we don't have the problem.
But if these grooming, I take it that these grooming gangs are coming from a specific demographic, namely men, probably a specific age group, probably, not too young, not too old. I doubt 70-year-olds are engaging in this, and from a specific country, that being Pakistanis, right? And so if this is a big problem, then fine, that might warrant restricting immigration from that specific demographic, but that's a long way from justifying forming an ethno-state, right?
No.
It's usually all ages, and the problem is that it's not. They don't seem to stand up against it. The families, they cover it up. I mean, lots of people work in takeaways or as taxi drivers and that kind of thing, and it happens under the noses of other people in their community, and it's never brought forward by their families. But it does happen to people of all ages. But can I just say, the first topic of the debate was supposed to be whether the Great Replacement is real. Can I just clarify? Do you two admit that we are becoming minorities?
So once again, there's nothing to admit here. There's no concession here. None of us are arguing with the fact that demographic change is happening. That's not an admission, it's not concession, that's nothing. That's just a statement about a descriptor. Yeah, I mean, we both acknowledge this in our opening, but you weren't here, so I don't blame you.
Okay.
But I have a question for you. So when you said that the Killiam study had a good sample size, is it true that the Killiam report had 264 cases over 12 years? And did you call that a good sample size?
I don't know the exact number, but it was a representative sample.
How do you know? So 264 over 12 years. Do you think that's Does that sound representative to you? As compared to
Well,
the thousands
how
of
many
things
cases
gone
do
over by the Home Office report? What do you think is
how many
better,
cases-
thousands or
How many
264
cases
over
of
12
grooming
years?
do you think there are? That it's happening in pretty much every city.
So you think that there's only been 264 instances of grooming over 12 years? Is that what you're telling me right now? Oh, hey, Mark, don't save her, Mark. Don't save her, Mark. Come on, let me ask Laura some questions. Okay, sure, that's fine.
Grooming
Bail her
gangs.
out.
Have a look at what you see. Use your eyes. Observable reality. I can start reading the names of those convicted. The fact is, already said, and you can Google this as well, the Home Office report on this issue was sealed. What he's saying is not actually the Home Office report on this because it's been sealed, but he's desperately trying to defend mass immigration.
Yeah, wait. So really quickly,
study didn't set out to prove that it was a Pakistani Muslim problem. They didn't. I mean, I think it's a Pakistani guy that ran it actually. They looked at a representative sample and then they said these are the results.
So to be clear, do you think that there's only been 264 instances of convicted grooming offenders over 12 years? Is that what you're telling me?
I don't have the report in front of me, so I
because
don't
when I said that there were only 264 instances over 12 years, you were like, well, how many groomings do you think that there are? So I'm asking you, do you think that this is the amount of groomings that there are?
No, I don't think that's the amount of groomings that there are. But I don't know if that's how many is in the study because I don't have the study in front of me. If you have the study,
but you felt confident enough to say that there was a lot of representative sampling, but you don't even know what the sampling looked like whatsoever. Am I clear on that?
I remember when I read it that it was a representative sample.
Okay.
Do you have the study in front of you? Post it in the chat on StreamYard.
The Killiam study. I'm looking at a review of it right now where it states specifically what the sample size looked like. So I'm reading.
Is it the study itself? Post it in the chat on StreamYard, please.
I can pull up the study itself. What I'm currently reading from is a website from Policy Insight that is titled "When Bad Evidence is Worse Than No Evidence: Killiam's Grooming Gangs Report and Its Legacy." And I'm under the subtext. Subtext of bad science, and it says that the Killiam report sample of just 264 convicted offenders over 12 years is clearly very partial. That's what I'm reading about. I can try to find the PDF of the Killiam report, but I'd be very surprised if they're just straight up lying about the sample size here. That seems to be a very odd thing to lie about. But I can check that for you. Well, but I doubt I'm being correct.
In the chat, but what I did say is that is the best study that we have, and it isn't every single grooming instance within the United Kingdom, but it's the best one and the only one to my knowledge that we have, because as Mark says, the Home Office one hasn't been released.
So what is the report? Group-based child sexual exploitation, characteristics of offending, from December 2020 from the Home Office. What is this report then? What am I looking at?
Oh, by the way, it's worth mentioning that I'm looking at that link right now. It came out in December of 2020. The article that Mark linked was from like February of 2020. So it's very likely that they originally weren't intending to publish it and then they did, right? That seems like the most likely scenario given the fact that you're looking at the report.
What's happened?
Why isn't that what's happened? Then what report are we looking at, Mark?
Why don't you post the report?
His Aryan brain can't understand the timelines. It's too difficult. Oh man.
I clearly understand timelines. The Home Office report into the grooming scandal has been sealed. These things are sealed for a number of years, usually actually a century. And the reason they're sealed for that length of time is to ensure that those who were part and parcel of any of this are not alive when they're unsealed. And the reason it was sealed is quite clearly, there's multiple reasons. Firstly, it will be overwhelmingly migrants who carried out these crimes. Secondly, the police will have been complicit in them. Thirdly, the girls will overwhelmingly have been white. Fourth, the local councils, MPs, and other people involved in politics will also have been aware of this. Fifth, social services will have known about this. We already know social services have been involved in this. And sixth, the most likely, there will have been massive community involvement from the wider Muslim community. And because of all of these reasons, the official report has been sealed and it hasn't been...
All right, by the way, this is the end of this debate, right? Because I just found a petition on change.org or petition.parliament.uk. Originally, apparently, they didn't release the report. Then there was a massive petition called Release the Home Office's Grooming Gang Review in Full. And then it was debated in Parliament. And then the government responded to the petition saying that the government was going to publish a paper. This was posted in May 2020, saying that the government, in fact, was going to publish a paper releasing the findings of the review, and then that paper was published in December of 2020. So you're just wrong.
The full report hasn't been published.
Wait, Mark, I want you to do a very simple thing. I want you to open a Google window right now. Tell me when you've done that.
I'm not
Come on, open a Google window. I'm going to make you do a simple... I'm showing you how to seek out information because you seem to be struggling with that a lot. So
I know the report has not
so
been
Mark,
published
it
in
seems
full.
unable to
I
Google. For
also
anyone at home in the
know
audience, all
the
you need to do
ethnicity of
is
people.
open a tab of Google, search Home Office Report Grooming Gangs, and the first result will be a PDF titled Group-Based Child Sexual Exploitation Characteristics of Offending. And you will find the report that we're talking about here. This isn't sealed. This is right there with
No,
one Google
you
search
have
that Mark seems
got
incapable of
a
doing.
report that is not about the grooming gangs. The grooming gang report was never fully released. It is still sealed. You can say whatever you want, but those are the facts.
Okay.
And the fact is that you sat there with such a smug, stupid look on your face because ultimately you don't care that these girls were raped. You don't care when there are negative consequences for white people of mass immigration. All you care about is that the Multicultural Diversity Project carries on, and you can sit there crowing about it, making money off it, speaking to your YouTube community about it, because that is your political slant. And I can tell you this now, I'm sure that both of you believe in feminism, you believe in all manner of left-leaning feminist garbage, but when it comes to actual real women's rights, i.e. the right not to be raped by gangs of migrants, you people are awfully silent.
But hold on, we're actually in
All right,
favor of
wait,
women
really
not to be
quickly.
raped by anybody, okay? Not just gangs of migrants. I don't know why you threw that in there. I don't know what your take on this is, but I just thought that I would point that out. Go on, Mouthy.
Can I say really quickly? Yeah. So just it's amazing, right? Like I've been looking at this for like 5 minutes. Somehow, like already I know more than like you have, and this was like your main point, right? So firstly, the article that you linked, right? The article that you linked said that the reason that they weren't going to release the full report is because there was information that was operationally sensitive to the police, i.e. if it went public, it would hinder the police's ability to do their job. But then later on in the year, the government released a report releasing all of the full findings of that report that weren't operationally sensitive. And that's the report that Rose Wrist was looking at, right? So the report that Rose Wrist is looking at contains all of the relevant information on the data regarding Muslim rape gangs. It just excluded some parts of the report that were operationally sensitive and that needed to be kept private in order for the police to do their job, right?
Is the report that you're looking at the one with 2,300
I think we're
offenders? Because if it is, that report's also inaccurate. First of all, there's no basic information in the report for, I think it's 1,200 people. Of the other 1,100 people, 30% of them, I think it is, don't have their ethnicity recorded. And then of the ones that they actually do have an ethnicity for, I think it's something like 30% of them are white. Now, that's an underrepresentation anyway, because our country was 87% white at the last census. So if you're looking at the government report, which me and Mark think you're looking at, that's inaccurate anyway.
Wait, sorry. So which one do you
Because
think
a
we're
lot of
looking at?
them-
Which one do you think we're looking at? Can you say
Is
that
it the
again?
one where it's 2,300 offenders in total?
2,300 doesn't appear a single time in this PDF, so it doesn't appear like this is the one we're talking about. But
The one that they released instead of the one that they were supposed to release, there was so much missing information from it. The majority of people didn't have their ethnicity recorded. And then when it came to white people anyway, they were very clever in the media and they said the majority of people are white. Well, it's a white majority country.
So 23,000 doesn't appear a single time in any capacity in this report we're looking at. I think you're talking about something different. But we seem to be stuck on this grooming thing on the reports. I mean, I would say that we're correct because you guys have failed to demonstrate this. And when we look up evidence, everything you seem to say seems to not be true. So moving away from the grooming gang specifically, we can talk about some...
Can I mention one more thing, right? Because so in addition to the fact that the report you were looking at has all the relevant information and just excluded certain things that were operationally sensitive.
Yeah, certain things like the actual ethnicity of the vast majority of the offenders and the fact that the police were complicit in it. You know, having a whitewashed, watered down version of a report
it's in the report.
Released does not constitute releasing the full report. Now that's obvious. That is obvious. And also,
are you like listening to what I'm saying?
Go through the names of the people which
you're not tracking
who have been convicted, and you look at their mugshots, observable reality tells you they are not indigenous Brits. And that's the other thing that you people always fail to do.
Let him do his ramble about anecdotes, Mouthy, and then we'll switch to something else afterwards because we're stuck here.
I was going to try and get another point out, but you just can't.
No, it seems very difficult. We'll just move on from grooming gangs after this.
Your worldview. It's as simple as that.
All right, cool. Mouthy, what's the next thing?
Do you want to say? Good.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess we can move on from this. I don't know what we want the next point to be. I mean, this whole thing started from you pivoting from the point about social cohesion to start bringing up like the grooming gangs, right?
What are you talking pivoting? Social cohesion. When you have white girls en masse being raped by migrants,
so
no
don't bring that up. We've gone over that, and you don't
White
seem to be able to provide
people
evidence for
are
that.
the
That's
victim
satisfactory. So we'll
class
move on to
when
something
they
else.
become a minority in towns like Rotherham and Telford. And the government have covered this up because multiculturalism, state-enforced multiculturalism, is the holy shibboleth of our society. So it can never be criticised. So when you're talking about community cohesion, I'm saying there is no cohesion.
This is
because
actually
you are
unbelievable.
victimized
It's story
and the
time. It's too
government
early
covers
for
it up.
this. Okay, so we can talk about, so there are issues that exist with enclaves to some extent that does arise from migration. We agree that this is something that can happen and that it's something that does exist to some extent. So the question should then be, okay, because you guys don't seem to want to fight us on the things about, for example, economic benefits and stuff like that. So how do we minimize these types of, there are no economic benefits to migration? Did you just say that?
There are no economic benefits. There are no economic benefits unless you take raw rises in GDP, not GDP per capita, but raw rises in GDP as the benefit. There is no benefit. What people end up doing in countries that grow their population to cause rising GDP is you have overcrowding, destruction of the countryside, you have falling wages, falling quality of life, but people who put raw GDP on a pedestal, they are fools. And that is exactly what Western governments have done. When you look at the effect of migrant workers on the West, it is always bad for people of European descent. And you see this in the UK. P&O Ferries have just sacked all of their British workers and replaced them with foreign workers because they can pay foreign workers cheaper wages. This comes out time and time again, and simple supply and demand tells you that if you keep increasing the supply of workers, the wages for those workers will fall. It's simple.
You just don't know how supply and demand works, okay? Like, sure, when more workers come in, that increases the supply of workers. You know what else it does? Increases the demand for products, which increases the demand for workers, which increases wages.
Which
right?
increases
This is why
jobs,
the impact of This is like supply and demand 101, right? This is why the impact of immigration on wages is generally a wash, right?
Quality of life in the West is not going up. Quality of life is getting worse for numerous reasons. And one of those reasons, or major driving factor in the worsening quality of life, is mass immigration for multiple reasons.
That doesn't speak to anything that I just said. I don't know why you saw fit to just start rambling about nothing after I directed.
I'm not rambling about nothing. I'm saying it pushes down wages. I've just given you a real world example that's happened in the last month of basically British workers losing their jobs for lower paid migrant workers. And I've stated that not everything is about growth in raw GDP. There is also quality of life.
So generally speaking, when we're trying to analyze the impact of immigration on wages, we don't point to specific anecdotes and say, hey, look, these are wages that had their, or these are...
No, we don't give actual examples of white people losing their jobs to migrants, because that would defeat your point.
Well, no, it doesn't defeat my point. That's the problem, right? That's why I'm saying you shouldn't bring it up, right? You should try and bring up something that actually would defeat my point so that we could have a more fruitful discussion, right? Because when we're trying to analyze the impact in general of immigration on wages, it's not sufficient to just say, hey, here's a group of people who had their wages docked by immigration, right? Because there could be another group of white people who had their wages increased by immigration. This is why when we're doing statistical studies on the impact of immigration on wages, we want to look at averages. We want to look at the aggregate impact. Now we can disaggregate this based on like different income levels if we want to, right? But even that, it requires more than just like pointing to anecdotes and then extrapolating from that statistical generalities, right? Economics is just a little bit more complicated than that.
Well, thank you for that word salad, but it still doesn't change the fact that we see time and again Western workers, people in the West, France, Germany, the UK, being replaced by migrant workers who are willing to work for lower wages. This has happened multiple times. There was a huge scandal a few years ago during the middle of COVID where fruit pickers on farm for farm work were being flown in from all over Europe and British workers weren't being employed. These scandals happen time and time again, and it has led
that no white
to
people
huge
had applied for they said that no white people had applied for the job, so they had to outsource it to other countries, and then it was leaked. I think it was 35,000, or was it 3,500 British people had applied for the jobs and they'd all been declined.
Yeah, this is all just kind of confusing to me because I think I gave like a very clear explanation of why pointing to anecdotes isn't sufficient when we're trying to analyze general economic impacts of certain policies. And then rather than actually addressing any of that, you just gave me like another anecdote, right? I mean, do you just like rely on your audience being too stupid to understand what I said so that you can just not address it and like pretend that...
Now, what we rely on is real world examples that back up what we're saying. What we don't rely on is the George Soros funded report that tells everybody on your side of the political fence what they want to hear and tells them that they should be happy about this process whilst they're all living in shoeboxes, eating the bug.
So hold on, eating shoebox. Let's talk about that. Perfect. Housing. You brought that up before. I'm very happy you brought that up.
To get to work because they're stuck in
because
traffic,
I looked up
the
housing.
Traffic jam lasts all
so
day.
I looked up housing because when you mentioned it before, you're wrong about housing.
Stamped government multicultural project reports that are funded by people like Soros, that are funded by numerous institutes that all
you can
have
read
an
the
anti-white
methodologies
bias.
of reports, right?
No, do you think he can read them? He doesn't understand timelines. He would not be able to read them. Okay, don't even give him that idea. Okay, so you talked about housing before, and I decided to look that up after you mentioned it. Okay, so I'm citing right now from a study titled "Immigration and House Prices in the UK," published in the Economic Journal of Oxford in 2015. I'm going to read a selection from the conclusion of that paper. There's a growing body of literature looking at the effect of immigration on house prices in different countries. This is an important dimension of the economic effects of immigration, given the large weight that housing consumption has on the household budget. This article contributes to the immigration literature by estimating the effect of immigration on house prices in the UK and highlighting the channels through which this effect takes place. Using data on immigration and house prices for 170 local authorities in England and Wales, I find that immigration has a negative effect on house prices. An increase in immigrant population equal to 1% of the total local population reduces house prices by 1.7%. So I just look into housing, you're wrong in that. I bet if I look into the other things as well, you're going to be wrong in that as well. But we'll see.
House prices in the UK are going through the roof.
But it sure as fuck is not because of migration, very clearly.
Get on the housing ladder.
But it's not because of migration. It seems to be because of something else.
Not in your little dorky world of, oh, I found a left-wing report that backs up my crap worldview. But in the real world, people can't buy a house. People can't get on the housing ladder. And when it comes to social housing, people are locked out of social housing because all of the social housing gets given to stream after stream of different refugees who pour into this country because our borders were open. This is a massive problem for normal people. But in your little liberal bubble, there are no normal people, and you can keep reading your little reports, but they're actually garbage. They're not worth toilet paper, mate.
So to be clear, are you saying... Sorry. Don't encourage him to do that. He's not going to be able to. So I'm going to ask you, Mark, very simple. Are you going to completely disregard any published piece of evidence and scientific academic work on this that we're going to cite during this discussion?
He was citing them earlier, so I assume
when it benefits him, obviously. But anything that we brought up, are you going to disregard all of it purely because it comes from academia? Mark, yes or no? Because I need to know if I need to waste time showing why you're wrong or not. Wait, I asked you a yes or no question. I need an answer on that. I need you to get a yes or no on that question.
Where first-time buyers are basically locked out of buying houses, and when you actually go down to the level of council housing, it is virtually impossible for people in the UK to get social housing. There are massive waiting lists, and the reason there are massive waiting lists is because there is a growing population, and the engine for population growth in the UK is mass immigration and the birth rate of newly arrived migrant communities.
So it's entirely possible. I just did get this. Sorry, Mouthy. So it's entirely possible that housing prices may be on the rise. However, you're making the argument that housing prices are on the rise because of immigration. When we have a study specifically trying to isolate the variables of house prices and immigration, I must be allowed to finish speaking. Can I appeal to the moderation here, Brittany? Can we get something going on here? I need to step in here. I need to be able to finish.
£27,200 being added to the value. This is one of the biggest one-year cash rise recorded over 39 years of index history. A Halifax spokesperson.
Brittany, step in. Be assertive. Go.
Yeah, okay, yeah, Mark, let Rose finish what he was going to
So
say.
once again, it is entirely possible that house prices may be on the rise in UK. I'm not contesting that in any way, shape, or form. However, what causes house prices to move is very complex. You're asserting that it's because of migration. However, when we have a study that specifically isolates the variables of immigration and house prices, it doesn't seem like it's the immigration that's driving up house prices. If anything, it is reducing house prices. So I'm not denying the fact that houses are expensive. I am denying the fact. I am denying the fact that it is migration that is driving that increase because you presented no reasonable evidence for it. So I'm going to ask you again my yes or no question from before. Are you going to categorically reject Brittany? Please. This is actually almost
white people leave the area. It's called white flight. They go to other white areas, and then the house prices go through the roof. And what you're doing is taking isolated slums and ghettos and going, ooh, house prices fell marginally
Brittany, what is this?
in a slum area. Well, maybe they fell marginally in a slum area because the migrants who moved there trashed the place. But overall, they're going through the roof because population is rising and white people are being forced into ever more conflict for the remaining houses in the nice areas thanks to mass immigration. Really simple, really simple.
In the United Kingdom, I don't know the
Brittany, this is...
Yeah, wait, so hold on.
Okay.
Rose has been trying to get something out, so yeah, you have like 45 seconds uninterrupted. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so once again, the only evidence we have right now for this at the moment seems to go against what you're saying. You've presented no credible evidence to the thing you're talking about. You're just appearing to, well, this is what it seems to be like, specifically in contrary to the academic evidence we have. So I'm going to ask you this is a simple yes or no question, okay? There's no need to go on a monologue about this, Mark. Will you categorically reject any piece of academic literature we cite to you in this debate because it's all controlled by George Soros or whatever? Yes or no? Will you do that?
I'm not giving you a yes or
That's
no
actually
answer,
incredible.
you limp-wristed weasel.
All right, well, fuck, you got me there. All right, go on, Mouthy, you want to say something, I think.
You call him like a weasel. Like, you're just not engaging with like very simple questions, right? Like, so, I mean,
because it is obvious that the more people you have on all resources are finite. And the more people you have in an area competing for those finite resources, that inevitably pushes up the cost of those resources. And in a very small area, which the UK is, we are seeing a growing population. Population growth in the UK is driven by mass immigration. That primarily drives white people out of many areas. Those white people then move to other white areas, and you see a massive house price rise overall.
So now, we have no evidence that's been established for this whatsoever. You're just rambling with no evidence.
Fell in a small way in that area, but I have just given you the facts that we have just seen the biggest year-on-year rise in house prices, and that coincides with one of the largest years of growing migration and one of the largest years for net migration that we've ever seen.
I have some figures, if I can share them.
Yeah, go ahead.
So in the United Kingdom, 86% of population growth is due to immigration, so either direct immigration or indirect immigration, so the children of immigrants. And obviously, as the population grows, there's more demand for houses. There was a study done by the government that looked between the years, I think it was something like 2006 and 2014 or something like that, and they established that due to the current rates of immigration, one new house has to be built in England every 6 minutes. They then looked at the ethnicity of the people who were taking these houses, and they concluded that 90% of new households that are additional in England were headed up by somebody who was born outside the UK. So the growing population in the United Kingdom is increasing the demand for houses. And it's not just houses as well. As we've got a growing population, we've got bigger class sizes in schools, we've got longer queues at the hospital and the doctors. The growing population has an impact on lots of things, not just housing.
Yeah,
if we want to pivot to something else, that's fine.
Yeah,
but I bet if we look it up on that as well, you bet we'll be wrong about that as well. But we'll see.
I think Mouthy was trying to
go on,
say
Mouthy. Sorry, my bad.
Yeah, I mean, like, this just doesn't seem to be. I remember, like, somewhat recently there was an incident where Canada's immigration seemed to drop pretty substantially, and housing prices kept rising at the exact same rate, right? Like, I mean, I know that I mean, the appeal to like housing prices are rising and immigration is also rising. That doesn't really say anything about the causal relationship, because obviously the things that causally impact the prices of housing are going to be very multifaceted, right? So it's entirely possible that immigration is contributing to a decrease in housing prices, whereas there are just other mechanisms that are pushing in the other direction that are causing an increase in housing prices on the net. But even if immigration did lead to a decrease in housing prices, right, there are no doubt tons of other factors that are also causing an increase in housing prices, right? And so the idea would just be, why wouldn't the response be to, I don't know, build more social housing or change zoning laws and so on to lower the prices of housing, rather than like kicking out all immigrants, when these are policies that we would want to be pursuing anyways, even in the absence of immigration, right?
So again, the answer is always the same from people like yourself. You say a lot, and in between the the answer to what we're saying is, again, we need to change the whole way we do things in the West to mitigate
building more houses. That would be devastating.
Bro, that would be devastating for the West.
Be devastating for the West.
And also, the other thing that I find amazing about liberal retards is they claim to be green, they want to, they love the countryside, all things like that, but instead of actually pursuing a green policy of a population which isn't growing in an unsustainable manner, they import people from all over the world, which obviously places huge pressures on the environment. Here in the UK, this extra building has driven several indigenous species of wildlife almost to extinction.
So migration is causing wildlife collapse. Is that the argument we're on right now?
We are saying that the more people you have in a country and the more development in that country, the less space there is for wildlife. And I am telling you this now, that is another consequence of mass immigration, because mass immigration is what is causing population growth in this country. Are you now arguing that population growth and increased building doesn't affect the wildlife or the countryside?
Depends on how you do it. If you do it in a sustainable capacity, then there are very good steps that we can put into place in order to prevent that from happening. We are not currently talking about like New York, where we're like at the peak of population density, and we have no idea how to fit more people into housing, like while doing it sustainably. We're talking about a country with, relatively a lot of open plains and a lot of capabilities for sustainable housing endeavors to be like built and constructed. So it's entirely possible to accommodate for the new population in a way that is sustainable, that doesn't harm the like wildlife population. This feels like a very strange argument.
The idea that the best way.
I mean, I can only talk about my own country, but in Britain, I think it's only something like 5% of the land is built on, but the rest of the land is not available to build on. It's things like lakes, mountains, pastures, farmlands, forests, that kind of stuff. So if we're going to look to build on other areas of land now in the United Kingdom, we're damaging the environment, and I think that's a serious issue. I mean, in Britain, we're now building on wetland. We're building houses on wetland, which are not safe and which is incredibly damaging for the species in those areas. We're damaging their habitats.
So currently just 6% of the UK is being built on. Do you think that the other like 94%?
You are a complete mong. I knew he was going to say this. Well,
I just answered that in what I said.
And so you're telling me, I'm not sure. So you're telling me that the other 94% is all you can't build on that?
Such an idiot. Your idiocy is amusing to me on so
Mark,
many levels.
Please, can Laura, because we're talking about something specifically.
2.5% is green urban and 56.7% is farmland. You do realize that farmland is developed land used to grow food.
Understanding. So
you can't put houses on it or the people can't eat. You absolute midwit moron. About 34% of the UK is undeveloped. That is it. And if you develop on that, death to all the animals that live there. You gimp.
The figures that you've just looked at, 6%, yeah? Have you looked at what the other 94% is?
That's what I asked you about. So I asked you, is the 94% all undeveloped?
The other 94% is things like mountains, forests, lakes, rivers, sea, that kind of stuff, coastline, farmlands, pastures, that kind of stuff. So it's not like we've got an extra 20% where we can build houses here. The other 94% is in use.
So to be clear, only 6% of the UK can be built on right now. Is that what you're telling me? I'm going to check this. I'm not saying you're wrong.
And flattening mountains, yes.
Okay, okay, I'll read into that a bit. Do you have any?
I'll read into the fact there are mountains. Yes, there are mountains, and no, you can't live on the top of them or farm them.
Okay, so
let Rose go. Go ahead, Rose.
Yeah, do we have any? So, what you're saying, I've never heard this before. That migration is causing environmental sustainability issues. Do you guys have any report on this? Any study on this? Anything that we can look at, or is it just?
Oh my god!
Or is it just individual numbers?
Oh my god. Do you have a report that tells you that a rapidly growing population is going to place increased stress?
I would imagine that this is something that environmental protection agencies would have a bunch of reports on if this was real. So, do you have anything?
And another point would just be that, I mean, like, even if we were to grant that an increasing population contributes to a detriment to the environment, that doesn't mean that on the net the impact of immigration on the environment is negative, right? In fact, I would argue that by and large, the most important thing that we could do to be combating environmental damages is things like innovation, building out the clean energy infrastructure, because then it won't matter how big our population is, because we won't adding new people to the population won't cause them to use more resources that are environmentally unsustainable. And it just so happens that we have a lot of evidence that immigration increases rates of innovation. Right.
I'm sure it does. All those Somalian rocket scientists, all those Nigerian brain surgeons, all those Pakistani.
I don't know why you would say Nigerian when Nigerian migrants are typically, they typically do pretty well from what I remember when it comes to performance and when it comes to education as well. But that might just be.
I think these guys need to be shipped to live in one of these migrant.
So to be clear,
there's two things to note. So I mean, firstly, just as a statistical matter, right? Like, it does happen to be the case that a crazy disproportionate amount of people who contribute to large, important innovations are not born in the U.S. and are in fact immigrants or the children of first-generation immigrants. I mean, this is just a fact. I can send you studies on this. Now, if your argument is there are certain demographics who are less likely to be innovative, I mean, that's fine, right? But I take it that at best, immigration would be a proxy for other more important metrics, more telling metrics, like things like maybe IQ or something like that, right? And so if your argument is we shouldn't be taking in
mass immigration raises the IQ of Western nations.
I have no idea how you gathered that from the words that I just said. My point is just that if your concern is like, well, we shouldn't be taking immigration from these specific areas because they're less likely to have higher IQs and therefore they'll contribute less to innovation. I mean, at best, I would just ask, like, why would we use nationality as a proxy for IQ rather than just having an immigration that selects for IQ directly, right? That seems like a way more sensible way of going about it that would harness more innovation.
So
we're not saying that we should have immigration based on IQ.
Because I'm saying that's the most, like, based on the premises that Mark has laid out, that seems like the most reasonable conclusion, right? Because if his objection
there are plenty of immigrants that come to the United Kingdom that have high IQ that still are an issue. I mean, Chinese immigrants, for example, typically high IQ, but they're still not us. They still create their own little Chinatowns in every single
city. So you don't actually care about the IQ. The real thing is the fact that they're not like us, right? That's what you're going to fall back on if we contest the IQ points.
The dialectical, we don't want to demographically replace whether they're high IQ or low IQ.
Yeah, you have other arguments, sure, but the point that we're just making right now is that the line of dialogue was that the claim was that one of the reasons we'd have for combating immigration is that adding more immigrants is harmful to the environment. My claim was that actually adding more immigration increases innovation, and innovation is the most important thing in terms of increasing the health of the environment so that we can be innovating new clean energy sources and so on. And then Mark's claim was, well, there are certain demographics of people who don't seem to be very innovative, and so why would we take in any immigration from those places? And my claim is that because even if most people from certain places aren't very innovative, there are still, of course, going to be outliers in any sample set, right? And so we would still want to get those outliers if we want to maximize innovation. And so if the claim is we shouldn't take immigration from certain places because they're less likely to be innovative, because they're have lower IQs, my point is this seems more like we should be selecting directly for IQ rather than using nationality as like a very imprecise proxy for that.
But why would we even need to have this discussion when there's the option for us just to say, let's not have them? Why?
Well, because we're just rebutting the environmental concern, right?
Well, why?
So to be clear, you guys don't care about getting high IQ people into your country. You just don't want to have no white people in your country.
No, what we're saying is we
don't
want
want
white people to remain a super majority.
Okay, so then don't bring up the things about IQs because you don't care about that.
What we believe is bringing in large numbers of migrants that change the culture, that change the racial makeup, that place huge numbers of pressures upon the indigenous people is a bad thing. And we also believe that all the money spent on these cultural cohesion programs, all of the money spent on trying to make these people more British, would be better spent training our own people, enriching our own people, and actually making life better for the indigenous people of these islands. Why not just put our own people first?
So migration investments and integration, stuff like that for migration, it's a short-term investment for what's most often a long-term gain. I have a question for you, Mark. So if I told you right now that I had a study on hand that demonstrated how immigration improves innovation, would you want to hear it, or are you just going to call me like a soy cuck and then
No,
ramble?
I'm going to call you a soy boy.
Okay, that's what I thought.
That is literally all I'm going to do, because you are the captain of crap studies and reports that mean nothing. If I said, if you walk out in the rain, you will get wet, you would say, well, actually, I've got a Soros report here that says if I'm in the rain, I actually get drier, because you're an idiot. You're an absolute midwit who can't put one and one together and make two.
Mark,
I say put one and one together and you make 78.
So when you've cited,
you have to do that to justify your position.
Mark, notice when you've cited like reports or studies, Roserist and I have looked into them, we've looked at the methodology, or we've said, if we don't have time to do that, we'll look into the methodology later. That's because we're not complete fucking schizos, right? That's because when we have evidence that might contradict our worldview, we say, oh, we might want to look more into this and examine the methodology to see if it's saying anything interesting or not, right? What your approach seems to be is whenever you have, you'll cite studies all day so long as they confirm the conclusion that you're hoping to confirm. But as soon as you get a study or a report that seems to contradict your worldview, you immediately dismiss it as, oh, this is funded by Soros, right? I mean, it's just not a way that serious people like approach finding out
specifically in my introduction that there is something called observable reality. There is also common sense, which isn't.
I got this, Mouthy. I got this, Mouthy.
You think complex economic?
You need a report to tell you that if you.
Mouthy, you're not telling me when you look at the window, you don't see like the graphs for how bad migration is. There's like the reflection in the window. You don't see that. I thought everybody saw that, Mouthy. I don't know what this is.
That population growth.
Bro, just intuit the impact of immigration on housing prices and immigration.
True,
Clearly,
just understand it. But okay, so to be clear, so your main citation, you categorically reject academic studies, Mark. So your thing is just
he categorically rejects economic studies that don't agree with the thing he's trying to say.
Fair enough. So, but the main thing is is just like observable reality. So, like, what if I told you, Mark, that I mean, a few years ago, I actually went to the UK, and my observable reality there was that migration was excellent for the UK. It was driving down house prices, it was improving like immigration, it was having all these positive things. So I don't know what you're complaining about, because my observable reality demonstrates that it's positive for UK.
I've already told you, house prices are increasing.
No. But I went there, and my observable reality was that I saw the house prices were going up, but migration was actually bringing it down by 1.7%. That's what I intuited.
To be honest, your observable reality could be anything. Because
perfect! You got it! Excellent! Thank you, Mark, for proving my point. Observable reality is dog shit. It's pointless. That's why we need studies. That's why we need analyses. Thank you, Mark. God, I love you. You're so good at this. Oh.
I don't think we need a study to prove things which are common sense. I mean, we spoke about grooming earlier. There was a grooming gang in Hull, in Yorkshire. I think it was around 100 girls that were affected, and 34 people were arrested and then all released without charge. So those people do not show up in any studies because they were released without charge. There are plenty of things that go on when you look out of your window that you don't get in a study.
I'm sorry, Laura, because you've been decently polite here, Laura. So I don't want me to. But the issue now is that, okay, so what is me and Mouthy supposed to do right now? We can't do anything, because if we are to provide you with a piece of evidence demonstrating that maybe conviction rates and biases in the criminal justice system actually ends up being worse for non-white minorities, then you guys are just going to say, well, the study is imperfect. So how is me, Mouthy, supposed to respond to this right now? There's nothing you can do because you guys have shut down all other avenues.
Take, for example, in the UK, you have, when you look at the people who are locked up for terror offences, they are overwhelmingly people who are either non-white or from a religious minority.
So Mark is not addressing anything I'm saying. Laura, do you want to address what I said?
There is some special
It's a
reason.
random
like,
word.
Yeah, we're just rambling now again. I'm going to put
and
this
that's
back
why
up.
it happens. But we're saying maybe it'd be better if these people weren't here to fill our jails. We don't need them here. Equally, you people keep talking about the innovation that immigration brings. Well, if these people are so innovative, why haven't they innovated in their ancestral homelands? If these Africans are so innovative, why isn't Africa Wakanda?
So if I tell you about developmental economics and I talk about the poverty cycle and stuff like that, will you understand anything that I'm talking about then, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, there is a noticeable. I mean, that's one thing that's worth mentioning is that there is a lot of evidence suggesting that being exposed to poverty as a child actually does have negative cognitive impacts, and there's actually evidence, at least across OECD countries, that innovation correlates positively with social spending, because when children are less exposed to poverty or desperate economic conditions when they're children, they're more likely to be innovative, right? But it's also the case, right? Like, this also, like, even if I were to grant almost all of your premises, right? Let's say that there are almost everyone in, say, Africa is not innovative, but then of course there are some outliers who are, right? Now, of course, that on the aggregate is going to result in like less innovation in those countries, because even the people who are innovative don't have like the infrastructure in the society that they live in to sort of realize that potential, right? But that doesn't mean that if we brought them over to the US, they wouldn't be able to do so or contribute positively to innovation, right?
So we got about like 5 minutes, then we're gonna start going and reading some of the questions. So
I don't think they have much to say about that, Mouthy.
Just in relation to studies, I mean, if I said to you, oh, I've moved to this city where I'm a minority and nobody speaks the same language as me, nobody dresses the same, I can't buy my food, I can't buy my clothes, nobody goes to, you know, the same religious building as me, etc., etc., etc. Would you require a study to demonstrate why that's a bad thing, or would it just be
no? I don't. Well, I mean, why it's a bad thing? I mean, that's going to depend on like what your morals are or what your values are. I mean, what I would just say is, of course, we don't need a study to prove everything, right? The point is, like, you know, so like if you were to say I go out and get rained on and I become wet, of course we wouldn't need a study for that. That's obviously easily observable. The problem is the things that we've been talking about throughout this debate for the most part. So like complex causal interactions between economic, between immigration and prices or immigration and wages. These are very multifaceted things. So like, for example, immigration might increase. We might speculate that immigration could increase wages because they increase the demand for labor, because they, buy products, thus creating increased demand. We could also speculate that they decrease wages because they increase the supply of labor. And same thing with housing prices. There are a lot of different mechanisms at play here that we could, theoretically talk about and speculate. And so it's not at all intuitive or readily observable what the net impact of these kinds of things are. And that's why we need more detailed statistical analysis. And so the point is, when me and Rose Rist say that we need studies because these things aren't easily observable, what Mark will do is he'll do like a Mott and Bailey type move where he pivots to a different claim. He'll say, of course, it's easily observable. The fact that house prices are rising is easily observable, but that's not the thing we were saying wasn't easily observable. What we were saying isn't easily observable is the specific impact of immigration on housing prices or things like that, right? And that's not easily observable at all, right? That's like obviously that requires closer attention and disaggregating various causal mechanisms and so on.
To speak to what you said as well, Laura, of like the detriment of like, social cohesion or whatever and stuff like that. We do actually have studies on this, and this is something that Mouthy mentioned at the very beginning, but we never really talked about. There are issues that can occur as an effect of like the things that we're talking about. Absolutely, we're not denying that those exist. However, we do know what we need to do in order to resolve these things. So I think the two major factors right now that tends to bring about better social cohesion and more like integration and more people being able to be unanimous, feel safer in the neighborhoods, being more likely to like help other people on the streets and stuff like that, which are generally seen as markers of social cohesion, are things like limiting, like housing segregation and people living in different areas, and improving economic equity and economic equality between different demographic groups. Those things seem to have very positive effects on the things that you talk about, Laura, and will lead to society in which Yeah.
Two additional things. Yeah. One additional thing would be like allowing more people into universities, because universities are an institution where races cooperate with one another. And another thing would be like increasing the rise of unions, because unions are another possible mechanism through which large groups of people who are often racially diverse could interact with one another and cooperate more intimately. So yeah, there are a bunch of things we could do to address this problem.
And make social cohesion and integration.
When it comes to house prices, I mean, to buy a house in my city, it's maybe £200,000. In the next city, just next door, which is a Muslim city, basically, you can buy a house for 30 grand. If you go to the whitest areas in my city, the house prices are just absolutely mental. Now, I don't think there's a study to say that it's because of immigration that that's happening, but you can see
that would be gentrification more likely. And there are a wide range of different things that you can do from a housing market policy perspective that I'm afraid the intricacies of that might be a bit out of the wheelhouses for this debate specifically, but that you can do in order to combat some of the most negative effects of gentrification. A bunch of policy we can do for example, to change zoning laws to make the construction of certain housing more easy and to drive down prices of certain types of housing. You can also look into things like public housing programs in order to further capitalize on those types of things in order to make things better. So there are a wide range of different policies to exist that are made to address the things that you were talking about, Laura, but it also depends on the job situations in those areas and how much the average earner are. So it's complicated, but just saying it's all migration and kind of cutting off there is very simplistic, and we have things that we know.
It's worth noting really quickly that it's not like, we would do
by the way,
things...
when he says combat gentrification, what he means is white people should be forced to live in horrible immigrant areas.
That is exactly that was one of my 3 prescriptions. You're right.
Live in
do you notice how good of a discussion we were having before you butted in, Mark? How me, Laura, and Mouthy, we were having a nice productive discussion, and now we're back to the screeching.
We're gonna get into the Q&A now, because we.
Can I just make one more point, really quickly?
Sure. And we'll have closing statements. You guys will get closing statements after the Q&A as well. So.
Yeah, I just want to say. On that note, it's not like we're saying oh, well, we should, put all these money into these programs. Well, firstly, doing away with zoning laws would go a long way. That doesn't require any, that doesn't require any money at all. It's just changing regulations and so on. But it's not like we're saying we should take all these measures, but if we didn't have immigration, we wouldn't have to take these measures, because we would want to be taking these measures anyways, right? Zoning laws and housing policy in the US is broken immigration or no immigration, right? And so the point is, we have these things which we would want to be doing anyways, and it just so happens that doing these things also alleviates the negative impact of immigration that you're appealing to here. And so it doesn't really seem like in dealing with this issue we should be at all appealing to immigration.
All right. So from Hagen, thank you for the super chat. He said, "Did you know that 13% of the population of London commits 50% of the knives attacks?" Okay. All righty.
Well, and then in relation to that, Black people are 3% of the population in the United Kingdom and 12% of the prison population. So the figures from the United States are pretty much mirrored in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about that if we want to.
Don't you bloody know that's because of all those terrible white racists who make black people do awful things? Educate yourself, young woman.
Well, people will say it's due to socio-economic impacts, but actually there's not much difference between white people in poverty and black people in poverty in the United Kingdom, but there's a huge difference in crime, especially violent crime.
There's a lot of other things that have to do with this conversation specifically, but if you want, maybe Mark can bring up the strum and we can argue for that instead. But so when it comes to poverty and specifically those effects, poverty does have some effect specifically on crime rates and stuff like that. But it seems like from the research I've seen, it's not necessarily poverty in itself that is the key factor there. It seems to be the degradation of important aspects of communities that tend to be in poverty that is really what's being addressed and what is being kind of found there as a latent variable when people analyze poverty and crime. So things like the strength of institutions, and then there was a second thing which I can't quite remember as for why that was, but there are a wide range of different factors, social cultural, social political, socioeconomic, that all tend to lead to the types of criminal, overrepresentations in criminal outcomes for different groups of people. Then there's also, because we're looking at past just crime rate, we're looking specifically at incarceration. We introduce another element there of potential biases and potential differences in strategies when it comes to things like policing, when it comes to things like the operations of the criminal justice system, that further change the statistics. So there's a whole chain of events here that we need to analyze and look at specifically to try to understand the image of, or try to understand the explanations for why that overrepresentation exists.
Is we need to write an encyclopedia to explain explain this.
Crime is
and make it
complicated,
out to
Mark.
be
No
whitey's
way.
fault.
Mark
Yes,
discovers
I
that
thought
crime
that.
is complicated.
Laura, commission a 1,000-page
Oh, man.
report to explain this basic observation, so the explanation ends up being white people's fault. That is your
No
job.
one is saying it's white people's fault. Okay, turns out crime is complicated. Okay, it's something that society has had to deal with for hundreds and hundreds of years. If we just had, Mark Collett on the politically provoked panel that could discuss this, then I don't think we'd be in the position we are right now when it comes to crime. Turns out crime is complicated. There's a lot of things that we can do. There's a lot of things we can talk about it in order to be able to understand it fully. I mean, the implication that Mark and maybe Laura seems to be implying a bit here is that there is some form of like inherent genetic thing going on there for. Oh boy! I mean, we've been talking a lot about evidence and studies here.
Of black people and find out that they're conducive to crime.
Exactly. Just look at the window. Right? You can see the genome of the black people, and then you can understand exactly where the crime gene is. Like, yeah, I don't know what to say.
You realize like any study that would try to disaggregate what the specific genes are that cause black people to have more crimes is going to be like also very complicated.
Yeah,
right? Like biology isn't simple as well.
It's absolutely fabulous. This is the most.
Wait, why aren't you a geneticist, Mark?
Of saying he didn't do nothing wrong, isn't it? This is the most.
What are you talking about?
Of being a meme. These guys are literally living memes. This is gold. These are just meme boys.
I'm convinced Mark has to be a 4chan machine learning program. I don't know what else it could be. I don't know what to tell you.
I feel like Mark like pre-recorded a bunch of things to say and is just like pressing play on his fucking like laptop.
It has to be.
Like I can't fathom how you could listen to the things I say and then ramble about nothing for like 5 minutes and just address none of the things that I previously said.
Any normal people listening to what the reason people like myself and Laura.
Doug, do you think you're normal? You don't have a single social media
listening to us. Hundreds of thousands of people were listening to us. People don't actually want to listen to jerks like you, and that's why YouTube had to get rid of people like us, and they have to build up jerks like you.
If people don't want to listen to people like us, then why have our broad ideas been the dominant form of political progress over the past decade?
System to get ahead above.
So now we're talking about the anti-white system. Now we're on intent again, which you want to move away, and you said wasn't important before because you can't defend it.
I love white people so much. I want them to benefit from innovation from all kinds of people around the world.
All those innovative Somalians, because Somalia is the hub of the world's innovative.
Mark,
I've already spoken to this point. Right? At best, nationality would be like an imperfect proxy for things that are relevant to innovation, right? It's not an argument.
Word salad incoming.
Wait, I have a question, Mark. I have a question for you. Hold on, a simple question, Mark.
I don't know what to do with this.
Hey, don't worry, it's fine. We're past the point of productive conversation. Mark, do you love black people?
That's a good question.
If you want a genuine, honest answer to that, the answer is if they are in their ancestral homeland, I have absolutely no problem with them. In fact, I think all peoples of the world deserve to have their own ancestral homeland, deserve to be in charge of their own destiny, and I do believe that there is definitely a place in the world for people of African descent. That place is not Europe.
But do you love
the same way that I respect Islamic communities in the Middle East? I think that China deserves to be Chinese. I think Japan deserves to be Japanese. I think Europe deserves to be European.
But Mark, do you love all black people?
I've just said I think that all races have the right to thrive and take their destiny in their own hands and have control over their ancestral homeland.
Yes or no? Do you love all black people?
What kind of stupid question?
All right, we're gonna move on to some of the questions. All right, so from the thin red line, it said to the lefties, London has some of the highest property prices in the world, yet London is majority non-white. Do you think the majority of the non-whites could afford to live there if they were in public subsidized housing? And if the non-whites left, do you think that the house prices would fall?
Yeah, I don't actually have a strong view on the relationship between immigration and housing policy. This just isn't really something I've researched at all. My point in this debate wasn't to take a strong affirmative view that immigration reduces housing prices or doesn't increase housing prices. My point was just to say that I don't think, come on, bro, it's obvious, just look outside is like a good justification for taking an affirmative position on that relatively complicated economic question.
So was the question for us to explain why housing prices are high in the UK, yet there's a lot of non-white people in the UK? Was that, or did I misunderstand the question?
Do you want me to read it again?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Yeah, said to the lefties, London has some of the highest property prices in the world, yet London is majority non-white. Do you think the majority of the non-whites could afford to live there if they were in public subsidized housing? And if the non-whites left, do you think that the house prices would fall?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the question is asking exactly. I'm not sure.
We
All I know.
We can move on.
Yeah, is that study I said it before? That's
yeah.
I mean, that's what I know, but I don't know the intricacies of specifically London.
So for all panelists, why are these massive demographic changes taking place simultaneously in virtually every white country, while taking place in virtually no non-white countries? And why are white people the only people morally forbidden from wishing to remain homogenous?
So, I mean, we can talk about this. So, one of the major factors is that a lot of countries that tend to be, that tend to be have a lot of white people in them have historically benefited from a wide range of different phenomena. You know, things like colonialism, for instance, imperialism, that has gotten them a lot of total, wealth in those nations, and therefore they're at a higher stage of development usually. That seems to be one of the major explanations for those things. And because of that, when we're discussing things like... I can answer that question, and then you can answer that question, and then we can move on.
Nations already at a much higher stage of development. The way you people always frame this as if colonialism was some magic thing that placed the West above all else. Mm-hmm. But if you look at, say, ancient Rome, if you look at the Roman Empire was magnificent compared to anything that sub-Saharan Africa was doing at the same time. How do you explain...
So there's a lot of different things. So explaining historical development from an economic and civilizational perspective is something that's very complicated, and that's something that I don't have a full understanding of, and I very much doubt that Mark Collett does either. But there are a wide range of different theories for this. A lot of it can have to do with specific things like geography. So for instance, I know that there is a book which I think there's some things that are mixed about it, but I think on the whole, I think that some of the points that it talks about maybe takes them too far, but generally are agreed to be somewhat accurate. And I think that the book is called Guns, Germs, and Steel, and it talks about a wide range of different geographic factors that specifically put specific geographic locations at an advantage to development by virtue of weather patterns, climate, arable land, like temperatures, and those types of things that put certain civilizations at an advantage. But I mean, it's incredibly complicated. The definition, or the thing that Mark Collett seems to be implying here, is that there is something like genetic inherent in the, I suppose, like the European genome that just makes them pro-development, and everybody else from other parts of the world are anti-development. But once again, the evidence for that is incredibly short.
Civilization. Europeans developed civilization. Certain racial groups didn't. Why do you have to explain that away with some sort of complex, sort of 2,000-page report?
Because it's a complex issue. We're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of years of human history.
Certain racial groups as a whole. So Europeans, like all Europeans...
Okay, so Mark, what's your explanation? What's your explanation? Why?
Different people are more...
say it directly. Be explicit. Don't tiptoe around it. Come on, Mark. I know what you want to say.
Different racial groups are more predisposed to being good at certain things.
I would love to see a citation for that. Oh my god, that would be
civilizations.
That'd be beautiful.
White people are better at creating civilizations, and we should be left to do that alone in peace.
Can you send me any form of evidence specifically that white people inherently, genetically have a predisposition towards this that other groups do not?
Just look outside.
The whole of European history.
Good one. So once again, now we're talking about something that is hyper complex, and there's
maybe we can have
citation needed. Did Europeans create anything, Laura? Did Europeans create anything? Have
Mark,
you got a citation?
maybe this is the disconnect. Like throughout this debate, you've repeatedly demonstrated a failure to be able to separate that having a data point and then having a causal explanation for that data point are two different things, right? And you keep trying to substitute one for the other, right? And it's very transparent. I don't know how you're not picking up on this. Maybe it's intentional, but the point is, when we say when you say our explanation for this data point is complicated and then yours isn't, and then we say, okay, well, why is it not complicated? And then you just appeal to the fact that the data point exists. right? And it's like, well, that's not really like, you're not talking about the thing that we're trying to talk about, right? Like these are two different things, right?
It's basically
No,
like
what I'm
correlation
saying is
causation thing. Like that's like really what
European
this is.
people, whether they be Hungarian, French, German, British, created these wonderful civilizations. Other racial groups did the same. Certain racial groups didn't. You can draw inference from that. And I don't need a 20,000 or a 200,000 page report.
Okay.
You just look at history. You look at the way the world developed. You can draw inference from that. It's observable reality.
So
The difference between me and you is I look at these things and I draw what is the logical, simple, common sense conclusion.
That's great.
You try to reinterpret everything that is common sense and normalcy and place it within your political framework. But to do so, it's akin to hammering a square peg into a round hole. And that is why you need these complex, wordy, word salad nonsense answers to very simple questions.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess what I'm just curious about, maybe we can approach it from this angle, right? So like you're saying that there are like two competing hypotheses in terms of explaining why white people have flourished and non-white people haven't. And you're saying that yours is the more simple one. I'm not sure why that would follow, right? Because you're positing as a part of your explanation certain genetic differences between the races. And I guess I would just need to see evidence for that. Whereas we're just positing that
why do black people run faster and play basketball? Is it is it because of their socio-economic environment? Does the socio-economic environment caused black people?
Well, the fact that there are some genetic differences between white people and black people doesn't give us reason to postulate that there's like a specific genetic difference that accounts for like civilization building capacity, right? Those are just two different things.
So things like Mark, I have a question.
Like really quickly.
Wait, no. So Mark,
like just.
do you want to go? No.
Yeah, just really quickly. Like the one point I was trying to get at.
Hello.
Before I was interrupted.
Okay.
Was that the point? Is we know that sometimes genetics can. Oh, sorry. Wait. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Wait. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So the point that I was just making. Before I get interrupted is that we know that genetics sometimes influence people's capacities. We know that sometimes environmental and circumstantial factors influence people's capacities. So you can't just claim that you positing a genetic explanation is a priori less complex an explanation than positing an environmental explanation, right? These seem equally simple, right? We both know that these are things that exist. And so if you're going to try to argue that your explanation is superior, you would try to have to appeal to some other theoretical virtue, like conformity with some empirical evidence that favors one explanation over the other. But you haven't really given anything like that.
Furthermore, we could also, like, the things about, like, for example, genetic traits like fast twitch muscle fibers is incredibly more like a genetic trait and not nearly as I think it's there's a specific word for this. I'm not sure if it's multigenetic, but something of the sort, than a trait like, for example, like intelligence or whatever the civilization gene is. So yeah, once again, just because genetics isn't like a monolith, all genetics isn't the same. There's a wide variation in the different types of genetics and how often they change and all these types of things. Genetics is complicated, and there's a reason why experts on the field of genetics and organizations that study genetics specifically disavow like race realism and stuff like these and these types of explanations for what Mark is talking about here, because it lacks sufficient evidence.
Okay, so let me go to some of the other questions.
Except for the bell curve. Read the bell curve. And
yes, written by two people who have no degrees in genetics, by the way. Just thought I'd point that out.
No, you see, because again, that book is simple, makes sense. What you're saying doesn't make sense. But carry on, Brittany.
So I'll write some like, what's it called, bedtime stories for you, Mark, and I'll send them over to you, and then they're going to be really simple, I promise, and maybe we can make some progress here on this issue.
Okay, so we had another question from the Thin Red Line saying, "Can the leftists name anything positive about multiculturalism, not food?"
Do you want to go?
I mean, okay. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you can go if you want.
Oh, yeah. I mean, in terms of benefits of multiculturalism, I mean, it could just turn out to be like a temperamental thing. I mean, I think that like generally having access to a more diverse forms of, more diverse forms of media, more diverse forms of music, having more sort of cross-pollination of ideas, people giving their different perspectives and having access to all of them so that you can form a perspective that's informed by the as wide or as diverse a collection of ideas as possible. I think these are all generally like pretty good things.
We can have access to their media and music without them living in our country.
Well, I don't think that Black people would have created rock music if not in the U.S. That's not justification for bringing them over here. I'm just saying that, in the way that we did, at least. I'm just saying that there are clearly forms of cultural cross-pollination that can happen when people are actually physically here that don't happen or to the same extent when it's just different cultures who are completely isolated in terms of their demographics and not immigrating to one one another. And so on.
Yeah, I can give a bunch of a bunch of more positives for multiculturalism specifically. The question was. Every time Mark speaks, I can't.
I'm only joking. I haven't got a girlfriend.
Okay, okay. So I can answer some of the actual question being posed here for more advantages of multiculturalism as a whole. So there's been a lot of interesting. I'm gonna trigger Mark so much when I say this, but there's a lot of interesting scientific literature on the fact that more diverse classrooms, more diverse workplaces actually do lead to improved things like improved creativity and different ways of looking at things and innovation, which lead to better outcomes in a wide range of different domains, whether that be company performance, whether that be grade attainment and other positives in education. That's one of the things that we have about that. So innovation is one of the things we already mentioned previously. It is more beneficial towards promoting internationalism and global cooperation, which is very important, especially in, for example, the domains of trade. Things like circular migration, for instance, which is pretty part and parcel of multiculturalism, is one of the best, if not the best ways we have in order to be able to improve the economic development of countries all around the world, which I think is very important. And hey, if Mark Collett really loves Black people, he should be in favor of circular immigration because that's the best way to build up those countries. I think it's very important. But yeah, overall, things like there's also like a language benefit and the type of different things, how there's a lot of interesting literature from, for example, Noam Chomsky, how different languages can actually infer just like different ways of conceiving of the world and understanding of it and thinking about it in different ways, which kind of links back to the point about creativity and innovation. Like, we can go on for a really long time about this if you really want to, but yeah, here are some of the positives about multiculturalism that we got asked about.
Okay.
Well, if you do like reports, I'll give you one thing. If you do like reports, you should read Putnam's study. Putnam's study reveals that immigration and diversity not only reduce social capital between ethnic groups, but also within ethnic groups themselves. Try reading that report.
Yeah,
that's
so I actually have read that report, right? And do you know what the effect sizes are in Putnam's study?
Putnam writes, in colloquial language, people living in
he doesn't know what an effect size is, Mouthy.
Appear hunker down.
Yeah,
that
so
is to feel like a turtle. So there are reports.
Yeah, so a couple things, right? So firstly, with respect to Putnam's study, I mean, Putnam did find that the impact of diversity on social capital is statistically significant. It also happened to be negligible. So according to Putnam's study, diversity can only account for less than 1% of the observed variation in trust between regions. And so like an effect size that's like of that small implies that a country could go from like completely homogenous to having maximum possible diversity, and the level of trust would change by like not even 1% on like a 5-point scale, right? It's also worth noting that according to Putnam, this negative impact of diversity on social cohesion decreases over time, and that diversity has other benefits which outweigh the initial negative impact on social capital. And about 7 years after that study was published, there was a meta-analysis which looked at like 90 studies which all tried to replicate Putnam, and the meta-analysis found that the majority of those studies failed to do so. So like this is not the best example in proving your point.
Okay, and so we had from Titus said the December 2020 report is the one Laura was talking about. 2,300 participants and 60% were set aside. Even then, only 30% of assaulters were white. Is there any debate that there's more homogenous society, the safer it is?
So I'm not sure. Everything that I was given by Laura to find out this is what she was talking about. Every time I looked that up in the report, I got no hits about it. I mean, when it comes to specifically the last point was about safety and was it multiculturalist societies? What was the word that they used?
Are you talking to me?
Yeah.
In the question?
Yeah. The very last question.
Oh, it said in the last part of the question is there any debate that the more homogenous a society is, the safer it is?
Yeah, so that's the thing that we've been kind of talking about this entire time, right? How homogeneity doesn't seem to be there seems to be a lot of the ways to be able to get at some of the perceived positive for homogeneity with diversity without any major issues. I mean, we talked about the things about social cohesion, about economic things, about unions, about university, about education, about segregation, stuff like that, and that's a way to kind of like get around them. But once again, asking this question is in itself a kind of like a loaded way or a very partisan way to do it, because like most things that happen societally, like most phenomena, like for example immigration, these things are multifaceted. There are two-sided, there are pros and cons to it. So a question that specifically asks just about the cons, you're going to miss out on a lot of the things there that makes it a positive thing. And that's why you need to have like a holistic analysis. And that's why, for example, me and Mouthy have the take that, hey, we can recognize some of the negatives that might come from migration if there aren't the infrastructural things in place in order to handle it properly. But our prescription is nevertheless, there are a lot of positives that are fairly unique to it, and we should try to capitalize on them as much as possible while minimizing as many of the negatives.
All right, and so from Gordzilla, I said, not a question, just wanted to say hi to Mark and the four ladies. Sorry, guys. Okay. From Nick Van, he said, observable reality shows that Pakistanis are not British. Pakistanis have a home called Pakistan. That is where they belong with their own people. End of story.
You know, Mouthy, you know what we should do next time? We should debate this observable reality figure. He seems to have a lot of interesting literature and stuff posted on this that we're not aware of. Can you set us up, Brittany? Can you set us up with a debate with observable reality next?
Sure.
Thank you.
I'd love to set you up with a debate with observable reality.
I'm sure you would, Mark.
Two clowns, having these two soy-filled disgraces live in a multi-ethnic ghetto and following them around, watching them get harassed, picked on, and bullied by.
I don't know what you're talking about. Black people love me.
Would feel
every black person loves me. I don't know what you're talking about.
A warm feeling of contentment.
All right. So, question for Mouthy and Rose: do you believe Wakanda is real?
I would need to see a study on that.
I would need to see observable reality's take on that.
Okay. What is this one that just came in? And so from biggest. No, come on. Have these two faux intellectuals ever heard of quantitative genetics? You don't need to isolate a specific gene to show something has a genetic origin or has significant heritability. And it is never just one gene either.
So what they're talking about here, I think, is GWAS, genetic wide association studies. And once again, I mean, the thing with GWAS, which tends to be a common trend as well, I see now in just the general argumentative style and rhetoric and mechanization of the opposition in this conversation, is that GWAS studies are not good at all at providing causality. They're merely illustrations of correlatory factors that exist within the populations. There's an excellent video that I'm going to plug my channel here that I have. I think the specific video is a debunk of a Ubersoy video on this type of thing, where I bring in geneticist Kevin Bird, PhD geneticist, to talk about these types of things, and he explains the issues with genome-wide association studies better than I ever could. But yeah, genome-wide association studies are by no means the irrefutable proof of like race realism or whatever. A lot of people don't understand what they mean, and they also have some significant shortfallings, which is the reason why geneticists don't just say, okay, well, obviously race realism is real because GWAS, right? That's why we have people on the internet and comment section saying that instead.
And I don't think that objection that they gave really like speaks to anything that we've said, right? I think the only point at which the genetic thing was brought up was that Mark claimed that his explanation for the differences and success between different civilizations is simpler than ours. And my point was just like, well, no, I mean, we know that genetics sometimes influences people's circumstance. We know that environment sometimes does it. So both of these are like already existing parts of like our ontology. So neither explanation has a disadvantage in that they're positing something new to our ontology and is therefore less simple, right? And so if you want to establish that your explanation is better, you'd have to appeal to some other sort of evidence. But I don't think that's been done, and just saying it's less simple is inadequate. Now, whether or not, like, I don't think I ever, at least I didn't ever intend to claim that it's like just one gene that causes these things. I mean, that just doesn't, I guess that just doesn't really speak to my point.
All right,
yeah.
really quick, because we're going to go into closing statements. I'm going to give each person like 2 minutes each to give your final thoughts and to shout out your channel and where they can find you. So, Mouthy, why don't you go first?
Wait, hold on. Can we go, because they got the opening and they got the closing as well on the opening
I was going to
statements.
go back and forth.
Okay, sure, we could do that.
All right, so Mouthy, why don't you go?
Okay, so yeah, so I mean, I guess my takeaway from this debate, I mean, it was reasonable at points when we were talking to Laura. Every time Mark butted in, he just kind of rambled about nothing and didn't really address anything that any of us had said. And then, I mean, there were like, I mean, broadly speaking, with respect to the engagements with Mark, I mean, it didn't really say anything interesting. Every time he brought up like a study or a statistic, as soon as we looked into it a little bit more, or if we had prior knowledge about the study he was referencing, it just completely collapsed. Then every time we would reference a study, he would have no prior knowledge of the study or would not make any attempt to look into it, but would nonetheless just say that it's funded by George Soros and it's fake. So basically, studies are okay to reference when they support his point, but then when you look into them, they actually don't. Studies aren't okay and not worth looking into if they support a conclusion that's contrary to his conclusion. So I mean, yeah, like the basic approach has just been completely bad faith, completely pseudo-intellectual. Every time me or Roserist has been presented with something that we weren't familiar with, at least I know this has been true of me. Like, I've owned up to it and I've said, I'll look into this later, or this isn't something I've researched, and I'll have to look into the studies that you're presenting, because that's how like people who are interested in like figuring out what is true go about new information that they haven't been presented with before. It's obviously the case that Mark is like a clearly motivated bad faith actor who doesn't really understand any of the topics that he talks about. That's pretty much it.
All right, Laura.
Okay. Well, it's been fun. I'm not really sure if anyone has benefited from this conversation. But yeah, I mean, I do agree with Mark that we don't need a study for everything. You can Google something and say, is there a study to prove this, and find one, and then you can find a study that says the opposite. And I think, you know, whether the fact that people being demographically replaced in their own homeland is a good thing or a bad thing, I think it's just common sense that it's a bad thing, and I don't think we should have to have a study or even a debate to prove that. But yeah, it's been fun, and that's all I have to say. I'm on Telegram and Odyssey and Gab if anyone wants to check me out. But thank you.
Okay, Rose?
Yeah, I mean, this was kind of disappointing. Really, we just seemed like we argued against two pawns in this discussion. It seems like the main thing that we really should have been arguing with should be, we need to have a 2v2 debate against common sense and observable reality, and then we'll actually get to the core of this argument, because right now we just appealed to people that was, you know, yeah, they were referring to something which seems to be very innocuous. Maybe they're a person, maybe we can talk about them, but yeah, we'll probably run it that way instead. I mean, overall, when it comes to stuff like this, we have been perfectly willing to accept the, you know, factual elements of this conversation, the descriptive grounds. However, what always seems to be the issue with these type of things is that we run into issues when it comes to the opposition having to make any prescriptive statements, and we run into issues with them being able to meet the burden of proof for the things that they propagate. Don't get it wrong, things like the Great Replacement absolutely carry a connotation, have historically been used in order to signal the fact that this is happening because of an anti-white, you know, kind of like, yeah, elite that's doing these things with intent. However, because that's very hard to defend, we saw that be jumped off, like moved away from immediately by the opposition in this conversation as a whole. When it comes to the second part of the argument about whether or not we should preserve racial demographics, from the case that we've made here in this discussion and from other general things that we can talk about, we still haven't been provided a case for why racial demographics in themselves have inherent value. It seems that through policies which we didn't even get to discuss about how this would be done, which probably we would have, and we probably, you know, would have had a few spicy takes being dropped here and there about how to preserve these racial demographics or how to change them in a way that is more palpable to the opposition here. But regardless, when it comes to these types of things, in order to be able to preserve these racial demographics, even looking aside from the prescriptions from the opposition, we lose out on a lot of well-established, positives that come with migration, that come with, especially things like circular migration and, even the cultural effects on, for example, things like migration and stuff like that. But unfortunately, whenever we try to talk about those, we got called soy because it's a literature review, or like a literature or like a scientific study. So there wasn't really much we could do on this situation. At the end of the day, we can just proclaim the exact same thing that the opposition have been proclaiming, that all our understanding of this is based on common sense and observable reality. And because there's nothing we can both appeal to, because the opposition doesn't seem to appeal to the standards of intellectualism or academic rigor, we're just endlessly locked in a deadlock. Hence why we prefer to default to things like academia and like intellectual standard in order to have these conversations so we can actually get anywhere. But yeah, I've been Roserist. If you want to find out more about me or what I do and my main content, I would check me out on YouTube. Same title, Roserist, 2 words. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mark.
Well, thank you to everyone who tuned in tonight. As you can see, we were asked to debate 2 things. The first is the Great Replacement happening? Everyone agreed. We said it was. They said it was. White people are becoming a minority in their ancestral homelands, all the nations their forefathers founded. The thing that we couldn't agree on is obviously whether that's a good thing. I think we have put forward plenty of very, very strong arguments that show that mass immigration and demographic replacement have impacted people of European descent in a negative way. And if you are someone living in the West, if you're watching this, you should do everything in your power to prevent any further immigration into your country. You should get on board in some form of activity, some form of nationalist activity, some patriotic activity to push back against this, because things are bad now, but they're going to get worse as mass immigration continues. And it's very interesting to see that the people we were debating, they can't argue in good faith. They can't talk about things in the way normal people speak about them. Everything has to be backed up with some obscure study. There always has to be a 2,000-page report to explain why something which is observably true is actually happening for another reason that couldn't possibly be related to ethnicity or culture, which is obviously absolute nonsense. Now, I will say this. I have been entertained by tonight's show, and I hope you have too. I think Soy Squared are an excellent duo. Limp Wrist and the Infidel, they have
come on, you can come up with a good name for me.
You just took half his name, Mark. Be more creative. Come on.
They have been entertaining, but ultimately, when it comes down to it, people of European descent, they do have the right to exist. They do have a right to remain a supermajority in their ancestral homeland. And if they do become a minority, they will lose everything, and they won't be treated well. They will be treated as a hated and despised minority who will be blamed for all of the failings that the multicultural society has created. Thank you, guys. Find me on BitChute, find me on Odyssey, find me on Telegram, find me on Gab. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to Brittany. Thank you to the chat. If you enjoyed this and you think me and Laura owned Soy Squared, give us a 1 in the chat, guys. Thank you and good night.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for joining us. We are doing our cozy inaugural show today. So yeah, we are on cozy.tv/politically revoked. We are also on Odyssey right now. I really did enjoy it. You guys kicked off the show very nicely. And I hope to have you guys all back soon. So yeah, thank you all. We are going to, all right, so we have all right, so we have, hey Mark, we now are going to be doing an interview.
Oh my god. Oh, this is the funniest debate I've ever had in my life. Holy shit, that was some high quality stuff.